and it's a really windy day today. Let me tell you, so you might hear some wind. And I always like asking Barbara, how did you end up coming to Portal?
Well, it's a fun story. I like to travel. I grew up in Germany, and my big dream was to travel around the world. And I went with I think that was one of the reasons why I became a midwife in Germany. But instead of working as a midwife, I traveled for a year with my roommate who
Yeah.
also trained for a midwife. But of course, we didn't think that other countries need working permits, so I went back and worked as a midwife. And then after 3 years, I had enough money, went to Costa Rica because there are a lot of German coffee firms. I thought maybe I can learn Spanish and work on the side. And so I was looking for a job. And at that time, it was 76. Costa Rica started in a recession. And the people at this coffee firms didn't tell me that they don't hire. They say, come back next week when that one person who makes the decision is there. And that went on for a month and 6 weeks. And after the interview, I always went to a coffee place. And there was this American, was there already months to learn Spanish, but he always read the newspaper, the American newspaper. There are a lot of Americans down there. And he said, well, you're looking for a job. Look, there is this one guy who needs a translator. Your Spanish is good enough. Let's check him out. I check it out with you. We want to make sure you're safe. So we went to that, what was it, kind of a campground. And there was this camper, but the guy wasn't there. So I left a message that I'm interested and left my contact number. And there comes a few days later, somebody knocks at my hotel room and asked me if I'm available to go back to Arizona. So it was a biologist who drove his camper truck down to Costa Rica to collect spiders. I was deadly afraid of spiders at that time. And said, okay. And I was running out of money also. I think I had really to think hard what I wanted, if I want to go further south to America or go back to Germany. Yeah. And I thought, okay, I can get a ride back to Arizona and make my way back to Germany. Yeah. So I said, okay, I'm interested. And he said, well, there's another guy who applied, and he chose me after. There were two contestants, yeah. And he chose me. And so after a while, I watched him because he was collecting spiders, and I didn't like that, but he pickled them in alcohol, so that was fine. Yeah. And we traveled around in Costa Rica collecting spiders. After a while, I learned more about spiders, and I lost my fear. And on the way back, through all those borders, his name was Vincent Roth, and he said, well, I'm living at that research station. It's a beautiful place. I would like to show it to you. You can stay for a week. I thought, okay. Nobody ever invited me and made sure that's only 1 week. Yeah. Didn't help because I never left. So he invited me to this research station. And then we were falling in love. And then there were volunteer opportunities. And so I stayed at the research station. And after a year, we got married at the research station. And that was in 1977.
And he was the director?
And he was the director at the research station. That's how I found, because how did you ever find Portal? Right. I said, well, I didn't find, I was collected in Costa Rica. Luckily not pickled in alcohol, even though I like to drink.
What were some of the things Vince had you doing then when you first started here, when you first came?
When I first came, well, the research station always has a program for volunteers. And in the spring, the birding groups come in, but most of the volunteers the research station is during the summertime, young students when the school is up, but never enough volunteers in the spring and in the fall. Mm-hmm. So it was really great because they had tours coming, and we came back in March. The station opened up and started to wash dishes and do what the volunteers do to the day. Mm-hmm. still at the research station. That program hasn't changed that much. Yeah, so volunteer works 24 hours a week for room and board.
Okay.
And yeah, definitely you set up the kitchen, you help in the kitchen, you wash the dishes, really important. Then when people leave, you clean the rooms, help outside also when there's room, help out with the yard, fill hummingbird feeders.
Whatever needs to be done.
Whatever needs to be done, yeah, yeah.
And do you remember like some of your first impressions when you came here of the area?
No, I do, because we were driving up from Costa Rica through a beautiful country, and we crossed the border into United States at Antelope Wells. And he showed me where, I mean, I was really taken, growing up in Germany where every kilometer you have a town with the pub, with the church, and you can see here, it's like being on the ocean, you can see as far as you want. And at that time, 76, there you hardly saw any houses. I think when we went up Silver Peak in 76 at night, and we stayed overnight, you only saw 3 or 4 lights in the valley. And I was taken by that. That was the perfect, comfortable wilderness to be
so you
in.
liked it.
Oh yeah, my big dream was always Alaska, or being a midwife, which parachutes down into remote villages to deliver babies.
Like a Native American village.
Yes, yes. So that was always my dream.
Yeah.
The more adventurous life.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I thought it was awesome.
Yeah.
It's so different from Germany. And then, of course, I didn't do any midwifery anymore, but I learned more about natural history, which interested me. And then I just wish my brain would be larger to retain all the information you can get by living at the research station. In 76, there were 3 full-time employees. Was the director, the cook, and maintenance man. And
you
then
remember who they were?
yeah, I was Jenny, the cook, and Joe, the maintenance man, Vincent, the director. Then Ruth Morse, an English lady who was the office help, but she worked only part-time. And yeah, that's what it. And then during the summer, I hired assistant cook, who stayed from March to October. And then the rest was all done by volunteers. So I was the one volunteer until May came and all the students came.
Yeah.
The seasons at the research station are very defined. So spring, you get the birding groups come in, and well, as soon as the birds come from Mexico, like still, the birders come to see those birds.
And so these are people that are just coming to rent.
They
in
rent
the facility or
exactly.
the area, excuse me.
Well, yeah, and the research station rents out rooms to naturalists, and researchers have preference, but it's the at that time was really great to have naturalists because they paid a higher price, and helped financing the station.
They had some naturalists on the staff then? Or?
No. Actually, Vince was an amazing naturalist, and he really was involved telling people, helping researchers with their research, or everyone, his policy was when people came, sit with them, since we all eat together in a dining room, sit with the new people, answer their question, make them feel welcome. And it worked out really well. And it was wonderful because so many interesting people come to the station. So you could talk to somebody who was part of a polar expedition and told stories about that. It's the wonderful thing about the research station, you get people who like what they're doing.
Yes.
First, or they come because they're interested in something.
Yes.
And was for me really overwhelming because my husband was 20 years older 26 years older than me, and before we got married, we were worried about the age difference, And I thought, okay, I go back to Germany and check it out if I find somebody more handsome or more attractive, whatever. And then I go back and
Oh, you did go back?
yeah, and in the airplane, I noticed that people are so boring. They are not interested in environmental issues. They are not interested what flies around, or they don't know anything about birds. And so when I came back to my hometown, people were more interested in drinking beer and watching TV. And I thought, okay, I go back. Okay.
How long were you there before you realized that?
Well, it only took 3 weeks, I think. Actually, I went and delivered my nephew also. Except when I came back, immigration didn't want to let me back in because I went through Antelope Wells and then Douglas, and they gave me 6 months of visa. I went back, I got another 6 months of visa. But then in New York said, oh, you were 1 year, you shouldn't stay longer than 6 months. And so they gave me two. I said, there's this guy I want to marry waiting for me. Just let me go to El Paso. He was picking me up in El Paso. And so we got married really quickly then after that for the green card. I married him for the green card. So it worked out fine.
So then what was life like?
And then, well, it was still the same. It's so much fun at the research station because what's really great is you have the young people, the volunteers. Then we had, Vince was very active. He took people, did a lot of excursions into Mexico. He was studying, he was trying to find the Ditmar's horned lizard, which was collected in 1911 and then never collected again. And he figured out there were 3 specimens in the museums, and he was allowed to open the stomach content, and because he was an entomologist, predicted where those lizards would be found in Mexico. And indeed, after many excursions, a lot of people at that time who were volunteers and then went on to become professors and biologists remember very fondly those trips. And he found the lizard, yeah.
Did he find a whole population?
Well, then after they found the first lizard, then a population was found. And then actually Wade Sherbrooke, who became director afterwards, continued the study and found more population in different mountain ranges in Sonora. Well, we lived, year-round. Vince and I, we lived in the log cabin, which Vince had 2 children, and the bedrooms were empty, and it was divorced. Yep. So I think we rented out 1 room. It was a kind of an overflow room. But we lived in the log cabin, a beautiful place to live. We had all great parties. When Vince took over the research station in 62 or 63, most of the directors lived in the main house. Okay. Because there was, and the log cabin was for helpers. And actually, he thought that was really cool. So when he cleaned it up, he said he removed layers of tacks and newspaper and paper of the log cabin. And then when he had the children, he added on the addition, which is an extra bedroom. But it was a privilege to live in the log cabin.
How old is the log cabin?
It was built 1876. Okay. So it was by Stephen Reed, the first homesteader in this area, until 86. So he lived there 23 years, and I 10 years. Best 10 years of my life. Well, one of the best 10 years I have. Luckily, I have more best 10 years. So back then, kind of the dark ages or the good old time, because it wasn't as busy as it is right now. Okay. At that time, the research station dumped the food rests out in a pit, and we could watch the skunks and raccoons and whatever animal came, and it was kind of nice watching them. And I remember we had a scientist working on Quaramundis in South Fork, and by accident 3 raccoon babies got caught in her trap, and the mother tried to pull her through, so she brought the babies up and I stitched them up. And she released them in South Fork again, but we also fed the animals out of the log cabin window. And really, 24 hours later, the raccoon family was right at the window to get the food. And then, oh, one of the funny stories, because you have those cute little spotted skunks, and they like to come in the houses. So we found one in the drawer, in the kitchen drawer, and I think they still find them coming in the house. So Vince said before he released it, he thought he will mark it. So he had the spray can, and he sprayed the skunk, and the skunk turned around and sprayed him right back. So it was so funny. There are a lot of animals stored there.
Yeah.
And I remember we were sleeping in this little room, and the attic, because the log cabin is not tight, there was a pack rat up there, and it would always thump down.
Yeah.
And so Vince was thumping back, when you don't go sleep. And every time he thumped up, the rat would thump back. Bear would wander around, and mountain lions. Also, you found mountain lion killed by the creek, and coming through. But it's really rare to see a mountain lion. They're very shy. I think after we left, bears became more. There was a year where bears became more troublesome, and they tried. There was a walk-in cooler outside the station, and I think under Wade's direction, the bear tried to break in there, and that's when they quit putting the garbage out. Right now, it goes all to the landfill.
Well, tell us more about what happens during the summer season.
So when the volunteers come, which are often very talented young people, and the researchers come. So the main thing was studies were conducted during the summer because of the monsoon season. There was a big study going on with spade-foot toads out of Riverside. Now there's still a study going on with them out of Chapel Hill. But when the rains didn't hit, those students and researchers were waiting there, and we got frustrated, more frustrated, and then the food then suddenly the food was not good, so we had to figure out distractions.
Right.
And we started, when I was there, to put on skits. Started with the little skits, and they became more involved. They were sitting down and had some elaborate plays where we actually invited people from the community to watch them. And so when you look at the photo albums, you see all those now eminent professors running around in tights and costumes. It was pretty good. And then we had also themed dinners, and then Howard Topoff and his wife Carol Simons, who even came to the station before I ever arrived there. And Howard always had great ideas. One time at that time, we used to drain the swimming pool every 2 weeks so it doesn't get so slimy.
Yeah.
And one year we just had the idea to paint it. And so all the volunteers, we were doing all those animals and yellow submarines. And then Howard was initiating to have the dinner in there. So we brought the tables and the chairs and had dinner, and he got on a big platter, I don't know, it was a bullfrog or some Colorado River toad presented. So we had all those talent shows. It was a pool party, a dry pool party, exactly. It was so much fun. And then after the summer's over, you really are happy when people go away and the station quiets down again. Yeah. So you have very distinct seasons. So you have the birding seasons, then you have the summer season with the monsoons and all the researchers and students, and then the fall was kind of winding down. And at that time, we didn't have that many visitors. It's right now, because right now they have a lot of classes, so we have large groups coming in. Even though back then we had the Arizona native plant society, which come with 50 or 60 people. But it was maybe we had 3 or 4 groups like that during a year, not constantly. So in the summer, always the seminars. Each researcher would be asked to talk about the research, and it was always open to the community, and which is still the same. The spade for toads, there was, and then of course there was Jerry Brown, who did a long-term study on the Mexican chase, which also attracted lots of other students.
Is that still going on?
No, there's no funding available. There would be people interested to do that, because there's so much data available because of that study.
Decades, right?
Yeah, because I came 76, and I think Jerry came probably, must have come in the 60s. There was also Alice and Bob Jewell at that time came every year. He had his study plot down in the desert, and then when they retired, they bought a house here in Portal and retired here. And then of course Howard still is giving classes at the research station, and Carol. Those were also long-term studies back then.
Peter Wasser was another.
Peter Wasser. So it's kind of funny because Andrew, who is now living in the log cabin, when he was a baby, my stepdaughter was babysitting him. So he spent already his spare time in the log cabin from the age of 6 months.
And this is Peter Wasser's
son, Andrew.
Amazing.
So it seems like the station really gets a hold of you, and people come back. And then Jerry Rosen, who's still bringing a bee course, leading bee course, he was the deputy director. He was the entomologist at the museum, but he came every year and studied his bees. That was also a very long time presence at the station. And then, yes, I met them. The first people when we came through the border from Costa Rica, and in the middle of nowhere there are those 2 guys in the fields, and Vince knew them, and said, "Oh, you should come for dinner." And I thought, "Oh, great! Gosh, I thought my English wasn't that great. My Spanish was better at that time." And I thought, "Oh, my English is getting really good because I could understand them so well." So they came for dinner, and it turned out it was 2 people from Germany, Bert Holdobler, who studied ants, and at that time was in Harvard working with Wilson, and his graduate student. And I thought, oh, see, that's the first people I met, the first researchers I met in this country. I could understand. In the fall, well, we started to clean up. Yeah. Still had, and well, we did lots of hikes at that time. I mean, every free weekend we would go out with volunteers. And Vince, as the director at that time, was really important that he took the volunteers and taught them. He made sure they know the trees, and we went hiking all over. In '76, actually, I was just there for 2 months. He discovered, we went to the base of Wind Falls and found a plant he couldn't identify. Discovered there was a new species of a composite which only grows on that side of Wind Falls. So in order to go to the base of Wind Falls, you have to go follow a creek bed, climb up a cliff, and it's not really easy to walk around there. So he had this whole program going with the volunteers, helping him collecting the data, and while doing that, he crosses the talus slope and twists his leg and breaks his leg up there. Oh. So luckily, one of the students from Prescott College was kind of first aider. I was with my sister was visiting. I wasn't with them. Put the leg in a plant press, and then figured out how to get him down. So then what happens? So we went back to the station, and some people brought sleeping bags up and stayed overnight, and then called there was a rescue team in out of Douglas, McNeil, which was head by Dennis McAvoy, who is also ended up in Portal. And he came with the rescue people up the next day. And there were all those people, kind of chunky guys, with the stretcher, completely exhausted by the time they went up there. And then we put the leg in a blanket splint and put them in a stretcher and then carried him down. But then I had to put him down the cliff and and put him down on a rope and put him down, head down first, lowered him down the cliff, and he was hanging on for his dear life. And they took off. By the evening, we had him in the log cabin, and then the next day I drove him to Tucson.
Yeah.
And by that time, the swelling was going back, and I could put a cast on.
Wow. Yeah. Wind Falls is a long way up there.
Yeah,
no
and
trail.
he was so excited that maybe the helicopter could come, but it was too enclosed. Well, winter time, that's when we took trips, collecting trips into Mexico mostly. Not back. No, never went back to Costa Rica.
No.
When after we retired, we traveled all over the country.
When did Vince retire then?
In 86. 86 with
So about
62.
10 years. Yeah.
But one thing was really important, what we did at the station at that time, which was very unique for that period of time, because at that time there were all those dances around in the area. And Vince loved to dance. And we always had dance lessons in the log cabin with all the volunteers. We would load up the van, and there was this band out of Douglas. Joe Diffie was the fiddle player, and he had a band. And wherever he played, we would go. Where Animas Community Center, Hachita had the community center, we would go there. Silver Creek in, yes, it was awesome because it had an outdoor patio. Sometimes we would go to the Gadsden.
Yes.
And Vince always would drive while everybody was asleep on the way home. Or sometimes not, because on the way home during the monsoons there were kangaroo rats and snakes on the road and all sorts.
Sounds like a wonderful time.
It was. If you find anyone who was there during the time, yeah, they recall. It was was carefree, even though those scientists or students who had to get their data sometimes didn't go that easily. But
still, there was
but
the
still,
fun and the
yeah,
entertainment.
there was always something going on. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. What was Portal like at that time? I mean, how was it, or how is it different today than your memories in the 70s, 80s?
Portal had much fewer houses.
Okay.
There, I think, when I came, I think Vince explained it like every 5 or 6 years a new house was built. When I came, there was a Cathedral Rock Lodge. The Richards had that restaurant there, and you know where Maya
Dick.
Yeah, where she lives. That was the restaurant, and then where Dodie and Howard's and Gloria's houses. Those were units they rented out. It was the only. And then Cave Creek Ranch was a motel. A Cathedral Rock Lodge.
Yeah.
Was beautiful, but then I think they just decided it was too. They also had retirement age, where they sold off the little cabins.
And what was downtown Portal?
Well, it's still the same. They're still the same, because the only new house is where Elaine and lives. There was the Shaughnessy's. They built that place. We built this house. It was the new things. And Finn Richards' place, where now Linda Pretty lives, are they? Finn Russell built that. That was already built when I came in '76. Finn Russell is different. He did anti-venom, and was instrumental or very much involved with developing antivenin for snake bites. Then Dave Hardy, also a doctor who passed away recently, from Tucson, built a house. He did, with Harry Green, tracking of rattlesnakes, the blacktails. The Portal Cafe was there. It used to be, when I came, was still the post office was there, and then later it was moved into the schoolhouse.
Yeah, so that was in with the cafe or the
Right.
Portal Lodge. What was in the building where the post office is today, or wasn't there?
There wasn't. It was the old school building, and I think when the school was going, Vincent's kids still went to school. Probably 74, when they only had 6 kids left for the school. They moved. Then they bused them to San Simon. I think around that time.
Yeah.
And then the buildings were empty. And also the teacherage was empty. Actually, Wasser still rented it back then.
Was there a lot of interaction between you folks at the research station and people living in Portal?
Not that much, because, well, the research station itself is like a bubble. It's kind of our own little world up there. And then at that time, in 76, there were lots of tension between the research station director and the ranching community regarding overgrazing of the canyon, because at that time there was no rotation of the livestock. Guy Miller had, but it was, I think at that time Guy Miller had the grazing rights, and of course it was pretty much overgrazed. I mean, even the cows ate, trimmed the oak leaves down there. So there was this big movement of controlling grazing, which was really not highly appreciated by the ranching community. And also using the Forest Service was right in the middle of that multiple use idea of the forest versus environmental issues. So Vince did not make friends with his opinion. It was obvious, kind of, and I think there was an push from the local ranchers to have Vince fired, but the museum stood behind him and wrote the Cattle Association, if they can prove the cows don't eat protected plants, it will be fine, and I can talk more about it. It got kind of nasty.
Did the Forest Service make any changes?
But the Forest Service did make changes over the years, and then of course Guy Miller Ranching, he retired, and the lease went to someone else, and then by that time the Forest Service made an allotment of how many heads and at what time, because now they had to remove them during certain times of the year and bring them up. Because at that time the cows were there year round. It was a tense time. It was kind of country-wide, and it was really where more. Well, and I think it was after Edward Abbey brought up environmental issues to the foreground, and where people could be more interested in fighting for the environment.
Context. And what did you do in those days for groceries? I know.
Douglas. Yeah. So I wasn't employed by the museum because it would have been nepotism. So I was the happy volunteer at the station. I would go once a week with the van to Douglas and buy for a week all the meat, whatever is now brought by Shamrock from Douglas, or then once a month we would go to Tucson for more specific things.
Living in a bubble, but a wonderful life at the same time.
Yeah, it's kind of, it is, because it's so different from the hurry of when you go in the cities or something like that. It was just, we made our own life there, kind of, our own entertainment.
Yeah. And then it occurs to me, you'd have this quiet time, and then the season would start again, and you'd see these people that you knew well, these researchers
Exactly.
coming back.
Yeah, it's like family.
Family.
Yeah. And a lot of the students who had to come for 4 or 5 years or 6 years to get their PhD thesis together,
Yeah.
yeah, it is like family. It's the hardest thing, even now today, it's the saying goodbye. You know, after somebody stays for 6 weeks or 2 months, and you do a lot of things together, then they go away again. That's still hard.
Do you see people that get their PhD, go on with their career, and then maybe many years later they come back to visit? Or
Yeah. Yes. And now that I'm working again at the research station, I thought, oh my gosh, all those dinosaurs. Yes, remember? Remember I was there. And then some people didn't even wait so long. They're still coming back with students. Like Stacy Weiss brings students every year, and she comes.
Where's she from?
She is Puget Sound University. She studies lizards.
Tell us what you do now at the research station.
Oh, now I'm running the gift shop there.
And you've been doing that
for 2 years. 2 years, yeah. It's because '86 when Vince retired, we traveled for 10 years all around the world into the diarrhea countries or rainforests, collecting spiders in amazing places. So we're very, very fortunate to go. We were trekking in Peru and going along the Marathon River in also in Peru, but then in Iquitos we went over into the Amazon jungles, and then we went. Well, the first trip each year we had a different trip. So the first trip was Paris, Morocco, and Israel. We stayed about 5 months in Israel. Amazing country. No wonder they're fighting over it for so many years. But then we had another trip to Colombia and Paraguay, where we spent half a year in India and Thailand. So, yeah, lots. I mean, lots to talk about there.
And what became of the specimens that Vince was collecting?
They are all at the Cal Academy because they sponsored him. Because the American Museum did not sponsor Vince as a scientist. They said he was hired for running the station, but not as a scientist, which hurt his feelings. And California Academy.
I imagine, would this be true that he saw himself as a scientist first, and then the director?
Yeah. Well, yeah, both. I mean, at that time. Had to do everything.
And when you were traveling, was this home base then? You'd come back here
once a year. Have to do income tax and rest out and fix up the house and then go off again. So we did that for 10 years. And I'm getting older and I would like to sit in a place longer. But I go to Germany. That I go to Germany almost every year.
You got places, you've been to so many places. Is there somewhere you want to go to?
Yes, I'm planning a trip to Ecuador this winter. Yeah.
And why is that?
Because when was that? Was it in '92? We were asked by a colleague of Vince whose wife is the head of a non-profit organization who bought some land in Ecuador, in the upper Amazon area. And they wanted to run it like a research station. And actually they asked Vince if he would do that. And Vince said, no, I did enough research station. And
that was after he had retired?
After he retired, yeah. And then I thought, well, I did all this work at the research station. I filled in everything. I never got paid for it, never got any recognition for it. I want to see what I can do. I'll go. And so we went for 1 year to took over that hotel in the Upper Amazon and ran it for a year successfully. And then, of course, then it turns into work. You don't want to.
Yeah.
And we
When
are still
was that?
retired.
Now, give me the.
That was in '92. And it was great. It was at the end of the road, and further on you had to go by canoe. And there was no electricity. We had a generator for the washing machine, which burned down on the second day. And for the lights in the cabins, there were solar cells which fed one truck battery, and that was enough for the light. And the refrigerators were gas refrigerated and freezers. And in order to go shopping there, locally, you had to hang a white sheet over the balcony. So when down by the river, the canoe came by and said, "Oh, we need a ride." And the boatman would come up. We go to the town. We buy our stuff, come back with the boat, carry it up there. I mean, a life like I always dreamed of. I told you in the beginning that was.
You made it there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, what a.
And then for the biggest stuff, we had to go up to Quito, which was about a 6 to 7 hour ride. Over, we never knew if you had a landslide or not, or if the rivers swell up and you can make it through.
And so you left because it was more like work. I mean,
Well, yeah,
you
and
got to
I
look
mean,
your
Vince,
dream.
we didn't get younger either, so
Yeah.
and so yeah, it was great because we brought that kind of community spirit from the station down there. It worked really well, and then we had a lot of German tourists there. The groups, and it's great. You give them some free drink. You had this little drink, alcoholic drink for welcome, and it works every time.
Does that place still exist?
Yes, it's
And
called the Butterfly Lodge, and it's part of Hatun Sacha. So it was Butterfly Lodge in Hatun Sacha was connected to the Missouri Botanical Gardens, and they had the directors in Quito also, and Alinawi was integrated to that. Actually, was joined, and this lady from California, she kept the monies for Cabañas Alinawi. But it was right now it's part of Hatun Sacha.
So you're going to go back there?
Yeah, I still have contact with my former employees through Facebook. I mean, I love Facebook.
Yeah. You talk a little bit about who came after Vince and a little bit of what happened after that.
Yeah. Yeah, when Vince decided to retire,
Yeah.
then of course it was written out by the museum for director, and and Wade Sherbrooke, who studied at the UFA herpetology and the horned lizards, was then chosen. It was interesting because he hadn't finished his PhD yet, so he came for 1 year as a understudy, and then when we left, he took over as the director. And I talked to him. I said it worked really out well because he could see he got a feel how it worked, and then he could see what he wanted to change. There's always something to change, and because time changes something. And then he came in '86. I don't know when he retired because we were traveling so much.
So, but he stayed.
But he
longer
stayed
than
18 or 20 years also.
Okay.
Yeah, time flies when you have fun.
Wow.
Then after Wade, Dawn Wilson was hired. She wasn't that long, yeah. But then I came back, so that was interesting. So I was gone, and I was living in Tucson, and then Jeff Bender moved in with his 2 children, and I had children, and they were always playing together. And then when the position for bookkeeper came up, they actually asked me if I would be interested, because Jeff was already working at the station, hoping that then the kids can play together. There are not that many kids in Portal. And so I thought, well, that's good because it gave me an incentive to come back to Portal, because I was living in Tucson with the children for 9 years while they went to school.
At this point, Vince had died.
It's that, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
And
so you did come back.
so I came back, I did the book. The only thing I never did at the station was bookkeeping, so I learned that. It was from 2009 to 2012. And then I went to Germany for a year and went then with the kids back to Tucson. And then when the position for the gift shop opened up, I thought I took that.
Did they always have a gift shop, or was it?
No, the gift shop actually, when Don came as as the director, the museum was working on a 5-year plan, master plan to upgrade the station, and they got funding for the classroom. And the donors for the classroom was a couple of interested in birding, and the lady said we need a gift shop, and she insisted that a gift shop was built, and she gave also I think $27,000 to furnish it and to keep that budget.
Yeah.
So it still has the same type of budget.
Yeah.
I'm complaining because I can sell much more stuff now. So that's how the gift shop got created, and it's actually a great addition.
Was there ever a time, Barbara, that, in your knowledge, that the research station was under stress, I guess, financially, or the museum in New York was thinking of closing down? I don't know.
Yep, all the time.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. As soon as there are financial, because the museum is funded privately.
Right.
So whenever there is a downturn in the economy and they don't get enough, cannot raise enough money, in '76 the museum had 4 or 5. They had a research station at Long Island. They had one in the Bahamas and one in Florida, in the Keys. Must have been beautiful places. And within the while I'm there, they sold those research stations. So the research station here is the only one left, which they kept. And I think in '62, when Vince took over, he had 1 year to bring the cost down of running the station. And Vince was a very frugal type and actually managed to bring the cost of running down and get it out of that path. And then later on, they was running well, and actually things could be improved. It still runs with a deficit, but the deficit evidently is manageable compared to what the research station offers. And by that time, this research station was so well known and also used a lot. I don't think they ever could close it down. It would be really a loss to the scientific community, because it attracts people from all over the world coming here. Well, I remember that one English professor came to study the bracken ferns and whatever feeds on the bracken ferns, because I don't know.
Yeah.
They had some problem in England with bracken ferns. Yeah. Then we had from Australia a virologist, I think. He was checking for plant viruses, I don't know, something. There are a lot of German, like Bert Holdöbler, who was a professor in Würzburg, who did the ant study here. Michael Ohl, the WASP guy, was Berlin. So, yeah, so people come from different places. But the thing is, if you study it, if you stay at the research station, you have to bring the funding along, and it's not really cheap. No, I think it's much more relaxed now. I think the grazing issues are on the back burners. It's not a thing. Meanwhile, we have the Malpai Ranch, where actually the ranchers got together and actually work more on upgrading their rangelands. So that whole fight is over. We had the fights for wilderness. We have the wilderness established. You don't have fights for that. There was the Rosemont mine fight. Also, I think the station has a better community outreach, even though it's still up there and people down there. People are not so afraid anymore because the scientists were always those people who try to tell them not to kill the rattlesnakes and tell them what to do. And I think that really has evaporated.
Yeah.
The community grew, so much more, and you got many more, a variety of people here. It's not that divisive as it was.